There you go. So we're gonna have everything inside of my app. And in my app, I'm going to utilize React Router DOM with my outlet. All right. So I know that that is what's going to connect me to React Router DOM. And for those of you who don't know, that is the nice little logo of React Router. All right. Now in React Router DOM, I am gonna have some pages. Now, for these pages, it looks like I am going to interact with the homepage, which will likely not hold anything other than just some, hey, this is a homepage kind of text, especially because we want to make sure that we use our time wisely. Let's move that over a little bit. All right. So there's my homepage. I know that in here I am also going to be implementing some sort of, oh, it looks like that's it. That's it. We just want the home page. All right, we are going to need an about page. And there's a characters page, a navbar component. Okay, we also have a not found page, which is also a very simple one. So let's go ahead and dive in here, add a not found page. Navbar component can stay the same. The about page has already been implemented. Okay, nice. Now this navbar portion. This navbar, to keep things nice and simple, I'm going to utilize React Bootstrap and bring in a nav. Gonna make that a little bit smaller here so that it can fit. And for this nav, because this is a React Bootstrap component, I'm gonna make sure we annotate that with my nice little logo. Right, so there it is. I have my React Bootstrap component. Now there's one other page that we're asking for here, which is the characters page. And this characters page has a little bit more complexity to it that we should probably talk about. All right, so the characters page, I'm gonna bring it over to the right-hand side over here. Rename it characters page .jsx. And let's leave a nice little pointer to it so that we know, hey, this is the characters page. Okay, now in this characters page, I'm explicitly telling that we're gonna go ahead and interact with the Rick and Morty API, which is here. Great. Now that means I'm going to need to utilize Axios to interact with this request. So I know that Axios will be here. I will need a function to be able to grab all of my requests. So, excuse me, I need a function to be able to grab all of my characters. So grab all characters from Rick and Morty API. All right. And that should be good enough for now. Uh, let's see here. Use state, use effect, conditional rendering. And it also uses a bootstrap component of a card. Okay, so after I grab all of them, I need to render a card component. And it very explicitly says that it needs to be from Bootstrap. So I'm going to grab that and say, hey, this is my Bootstrap card. All right. Now there's a little bit of a warning here telling me that it's going to utilize pagination. So I am going to need to have a previous and next way of being able to handle this. All right. So here we're going to go ahead and do previous. And here we're going to do next. And I see that in here, I'm getting a next and a previous that I can easily utilize to insert into these buttons. All right. So I should be able to deal with pagination pretty well. And there's my layout for my characters page. Let me see here. So part 3 it's going to go into navigation where we can actually see some character details. All right. So let's grab this. Let's bring it down. Here we're going to have some character details. And for this character details page, we're probably going to need to dissect this as well. So let's grab that and let's make everything a little bit smaller so that we can compress it. Still want to keep the card visual. Okay, looks like that's as small as I'm going to be able to make it. So let's do that. All right. Now in this characters page, it's going to show all of the info for a single character. It should have some dynamic routing and utilize use navigate. Okay. So this tells me that every single card will likely have a link inside of it. Okay. So, oh, can't do that. Let's go ahead and try this number. All right, so we're gonna have a link. That link is gonna take us to a singular characters page, and that singular characters page should look as such, where it's going to make a request to grab a character from the Rick and Morty API, but it's going to be pending on the parameter that gets passed in. And that is very important that we highlight. So I'm going to go ahead and actually highlight it as well. Okay, we're looking for a parameter there. All right. Finally, we have the favorites character page, but I think this part we're going to go ahead and leave towards the end. All right. So there's my entire layout, right? We know that this one characters page is in fact going to take in one parameter, which will likely be the character ID. All right. Awesome. And I think that pretty much maps out everything that I want to integrate. I do still have this functions tool that I'm going to utilize later on once I'm dealing with favorite characters. Okay, fantastic. At this point, I pretty much have my application laid out. Does anyone have any questions before I start coding it out? No questions at all? We all feel comfortable? Okay, easy peasy. In that case, let's go ahead and dive straight into it. I'm going to close all of this up and then I'll give you guys a quick little project breakdown. As you can see, my project is already running. I did a lot of the little administrative stuff for us. I created the project. I went ahead and installed both Axios, Bootstrap, React Bootstrap, and React Router DOM to make sure that I can utilize them inside of this project. I do have a router already created with only the path for app. In main.jsx, I am utilizing the router provider to render said router that I created. And the only page, or excuse me, the only actual component that I have available as of now is of app. All right. Awesome. Well, first things first, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of anything I'm not using, which is pretty much everything. And I'm going to actually connect my router DOM, right? Because I want to have access to my pages. So in order to have access to my pages, I need to make sure that I connect this. And as I see here, what I need is an outlet. So I'm going to go ahead and utilize outlet, which as of now, it's not going to have any sort of context. What are you complaining about, React? Oh, fine. And then I'm going to go ahead and import outlet. from React router. All right, let's make sure my application is still rendering. Great, I'm not seeing any issues. Now I'm going to change directory into pages. And inside of pages, I'm going to create the following structure. All right, so I'm going to need a homepage, .jsx. I am going to need an about page, .jsx. I'm also going to need a not found page, .jsx. And I'm going to need a characters page. Actually, there's one more. There's character details page. All right. Now that was all created inside of Pages. I'm going to give them all a very generic template. If you all get the React extension built in, you should be able to utilize RFC and then just press tab and that will populate it for you. That stands for React Functional Component. So know that that is a reference there. I purposely didn't bring any of those things in just to make sure that you guys could watch me actually code this out. It looks like GitHub Copilot is trying to hook me up and save me some typing, which I greatly appreciate. I'm going to go ahead and take this, probably remove this P tag actually, or why not? Let's have a P tag. And let's just use some lorem ipsum. Oh, which it doesn't let me do that. There we go. All right. There's our about page. I can take that functional component and use it pretty much everywhere just to make sure that it's actually detailing. Right, so there you can see that a couple of things are being fixed. I'm changing just the character details page. Next is going to be the character page. I'm going to go into the home page. Also address those changes. And then finally, my about page, or excuse me, my not found page. All right, so all of the pages have been created, but as of now, I don't have any access to them. That is because I need to make sure that I address my pages within my router. All right, so my router addresses all of my pages. Now that I've created everything, I can go ahead, come into my router. I am going to want some children for my router. And for these children, what I want is going to be a path, or excuse me, I need a index, which is true. This means that this is the first page that's going to be rendered. The element that I want to render is a home page. I am then going to also introduce, oh, forgot to put my comma in here. I am then going to also introduce my about page. So here for my path, I'm actually going to write about. And then this is kind of up for debate. Some people like putting backslashes at the very end of it. Others say that you should never put backslashes. Really up for preference. Nothing necessarily against it. I always put my backslashes at the very end because I want to make sure that everything ends. I know that that's going to use my about page. I'm then going to generate my next path, which this path will be of characters. That's going to render my characters page. And then finally, I'm going to render my last page here, or excuse me, my second to last page here, which will be of path. I'm not going to do character details. Instead, what I'm going to do is characters. And then just like I named it there, would be character ID with a backslash. And then the element that I'm going to render will be the character detail page. And just to make sure that it's character detail and not details, so it's details with an S, not detail. So let's change that. All right. I could close up my object there, and I could see that Copilot is getting more in the way than actually helping me. So I'm actually gonna put that to sleep now so that it won't mess up all of my code. All right. And now I can go ahead and finally implement my last page, which is going to be my not found page. So here is my path, where for everything else that has not been included, I'm going to utilize a star and implement the element of, hey, this is my not found page. All right, there is my router that has been created. It is a list, or excuse me, an array of objects. All of them have the key of path and element. All right, I need to fix a couple of import statements here. So I'm going to go ahead and import my homepage from, and this is from pages slash homepage.jsx. I would like to import my about page. I would also like to import my not found page. I need characters and characters details. Okay, this is characters. And then finally, I need character details. All right. Seeing a hand go up. Go ahead, Dom.
Does it matter the order of these at all? Like, is there a convention? Should you follow, you put it in the dictionary objects below, so you should follow that, or it doesn't matter for the imports?
The only convention that there is for imports, and this is kind of a rabbit hole, it's outside, local, and native, right? So for example here, what I have outside is or sorry, create browser router. So that is an outside library. Everything local is homepage all the way down to app.jsx. And then finally, something like native would be, hey, I want to import useState from React, right? That would be the last import that goes in here. So it's outside local and native, and it's typically separated by a white space. All right. Other than that, it really doesn't matter unless you're talking about CSS. If it's dealing with CSS, whichever one you want to be like the index or essentially the master of all your CSS should go last. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, perfect. Thanks.
Of course. All right. Awesome. So now we brought everything come to live now. Hopefully, let me check Node.js to make sure that everything's still compiling and I'm not running into an error. Looks like I am. If I come over to homepage, homepage is there. If I go over to about renders. If I come over to characters, characters also renders. And then finally, if I were to come over to characters, I don't know, 23, that should also bring up my character detail page. All right. And then anything that I didn't describe. All right. So if I just type in anything, that should take me to my now found page. Easy peasy. Awesome. Any questions over how I created the React router structure? Okay, is there anything explicitly that you guys think we should focus on? I don't want to bore you guys by doing a bunch of template code. So if there's anything that we should highlight, you could let me know. Okay, awesome. Well, until you guys say something, I'm going to go ahead and bore you guys with template code. So I'm going to go ahead and dive into the next portion here, which is going to be bringing in my nav bar. Here I'm going to go to Bootstrap. what I want to utilize is a nav bar. That is a component. So I'm going to take a look at components. And here in components, I can see nav bars. Great. I really do not care which nav bar I utilize. So to keep my life simple, I'm going to go ahead and grab this nav right here. All right. I'm going to grab this nav bar. I'm going to go ahead and generate my component. So I'm going to change directory one back into components. And in here, I'm going to make my navbar .jsx, and I'm going to make my character card .jsx. Now, for my navbar, I'm going to simply paste everything that came in there. I'm going to remove this basic example and call it navbar. And then I'm going to add it into my app, just like I did in the drawing. All right, in the drawing, my app, my nav lives inside of the app. All right, I'm going to replace this H1 with my navbar. Okay, so let's bring that in. I'm going to go ahead and import navbar from components at navbar. And now when we come over, we could see we have our nice little bootstrap navbar. Fantastic. Now to actually make it ours, I can come over to the navbar. I'm going to replace this brand with good old Rick and Morty. I'm going to change this href. These hrefs, we're going to treat them differently. So I'm going to wait to deal with those. I don't care about home because I know that my logo brings me to home. I could add about and I could add characters, but I definitely don't need a whole drop down portion. So I'm going to get rid of the entire drop down and just leave these two links. All right. So now if I take a look at it, if I open it up, I have my about page and I have my characters page, both of which do not work as of now. Well, why don't they work? All right, what's wrong with this nav bar? Why isn't it working?
Is it because we haven't actually like linked it to the app.jsx?
Let's see. So the nav bar is linked to app.jsx.
Okay, then ignore my question, my theory.
No,
Is it 'cause it
we're
doesn't have a click yet?
we're debugging. Okay, nice. So we don't have a click yet. Let's actually fix that, right? We want to go, hey, this should be taking me to my slash because that's my path. This one should be taking me to slash about, and this one should be taking me to slash characters, right? Okay, I refresh it. Hey, here's my Rick and Morty. I go to about. Okay, about is happening. I go to characters, and characters is happening. But is this the right method here? Is this what I'm supposed to do? Let's talk about a little bit of the application. All right. I'm gonna go ahead and create a use state here. Oh, Jesus. Let's call it user, and let's have our set user. Here, I'm just gonna make it a use state that is going to be equal to null. I'm gonna go ahead and import use state from React. All right. And I'm also going to grab use effect. Why not? So that we could actually see the values of the content that's being pulled there or held there. Let's grab that use effect. And let's quickly utilize a use effect that will console.log the state of user every single time that the user changes. All right. And then finally, let's just add a quick little button at the bottom. This button is going to change user and on click. Whoa, there you go. It's going to have a on click method that will set the user to I'm a user. All right, let's open up the console really quick. delete all of this garbage that's there from before, and let's take a look. So right now, the user is null. My application has just rendered. That's what I expected, right? I went and said, hey, here's my user. My initial state is of null, right? And I know that useState is a function that returns a getter and returns a setter. UseEffect is a function that takes in a function to activate and a dependency. Dependency, sure, why not? A dependency list of states so that if it changes, it should trigger the function. All right, so there's my UseEffect. There's my getter and setter. And when I click on change user, well, that function is going to change the state of user. So what should I see in my console? You guys are scaring me. We should know
User.
this. Okay, awesome. We should see I am a user, right? Because we're changing the state of user. And that's what useEffect is doing. If I change the state of user, which we're seeing here, that is a 1-for-1 match. My dependency array gets triggered. The function that's passed inside of useEffect is triggered. And we console.log the changes into my terminal. All right. So we click change user, and now we can see I'm a user. Great. But what happens when I change my URL pattern? All right, let's pay attention to the console when I click on this. Well, my user just went back to null. My state didn't persist. Why is that happening?
We didn't
That
tell it
that
to persist.
go ahead, Patty.
Sorry, I was saying we didn't tell it to persist. We didn't give it the command to stay there and keep returning.
That's a good assumption, but that's not actually something you could do with state,
No,
right?
never mind then.
Yeah. What about you, Albert? What was your thought process?
That default, I forget the command, but the default state.
Oh, the
Sorry, I can't.
prevent.default for an
There we
event.
go. That one.
Okay, nice. So prevent.default for an event. But what event? What's the event that we're looking for?
Isn't it because it's the change users inside that outlet? And so the state is inside that outlet, so it's always going to change. So we have to put it up higher within the app itself.
Okay, that's a good assumption, and you're going down the right hole there, right? Um, you're not wrong about how state is being dispersed throughout the application, but really what we're looking for here, let's pay attention to the network tab, right? Let's maybe this will help us clear this up. I'm going to clear it. I'm going to refresh the application, and at the same time we're looking at the network tab, let's also look at the console. Why not? I forgot to bring up the console on the right-hand side. Nope, that ain't it. All right, we're gonna have to figure this out as we go. Let's see. Dockside. Nope, nope. All right, we're gonna go ahead and change the user. Okay, the change user has happened. Let's come over to the console. We can see that I'm a user, right? We just did that. Now, if I'm looking at the network tab, when I click on about, whoa, wait a minute. About just re-rendered my entire application. If I come over to the console, I should see only null. But notice that all of my previous console.log statements are gone. That's because Bootstrap, by default, whenever I render my navbar, if we take a look at this navbar for about, this is actually an anchor tag, right? And going along with the case of, hey, there's an event that I want to handle that Albert brought to our attention. Well, the event that I'm handling is navigation, right? in order to change the behavior of this anchor tag, I have to tell it that it needs to add or act as a link from React Router DOM. Right? That way it's not re-rendering my application. So let's go through that process. I'm going to go ahead and come over to my navbar. These are my links, and I see one more here. I'm going to go ahead and import. What I'm going to import is going to be my link element from React Router DOM. And these elements here, for all of my hrefs, I am going to change them into a 2. And I'm also going to tell it that this should ask or act as a link from React Router DOM. And now you can see they all have the class of navlink. All right, if I come over to my network tab and I come to my messages, because right now it's rendering some old errors. Oh, there you go. Now it's side by side. Nice. Let's refresh it. Okay, so there we can see our null. My application just rendered one time. I click on change user. I see I'm a user. And now if I go to about or characters, my network tab is not resetting. It's not sending a new request, nor is my console being reset. I can now navigate throughout my application without sending a brand new request to the server. All right, this is what turns it into a single page application. It's rendering one time and one time only, and I have my navigation capabilities through JavaScript, not through the browser. Does anyone have any questions about this? This is a big part of your assessment. So if you have any questions, now's the time.
I was just gonna say, I think this is what I meant by when I said we didn't tell it not to reset. I just didn't word it right.
Gotcha. Okay, fantastic. So there you go. We have our state, everything's good to go, and I have my navigation capabilities. So now I can come over to app.jsx. I could get rid, or I'm going to comment it out. I'm not necessarily going to get rid of it, but I could kind of clean this up a little bit, get rid of this about button because I know I'm not going to use it. I'm able to render my application and grab some details. Now, the next big challenge is going to be the characters page, where I want to be able to render a series of characters. All right. Let's come over to our characters card, or excuse me, not our characters card. We'll deal with that here shortly. I'm going to start over with the characters page. And in here, what I want to do is I want to render all of the characters with a card component and set a next and a previous. Nice. So I can get started with that. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get rid of this portion. Here, I'm going to have a div. This division is going to hold 2 buttons. And for this button, I'm going to have previous. And for the next one, I'm going to go ahead and have next. I'm going to throw a little bit of CSS here. Let's see, justified content, space between, and this should not be a div. This should be a fragment tag, but that's okay. Boom, boom, boom. All right, let's see what that looks like. It's probably not going to look the greatest. That's okay. All right, so there we can see our previous and we can see our next buttons being displayed inside of my application. Fantastic. Now the next portion is going to be rendering a card. Okay, so that takes me to my character card, which I know is going to be a Bootstrap component. Come back over, take a look at cards, and this one's going to make my life pretty simple, so I'm going to grab this. I don't necessarily need to change anything other than the name. So I'm going to change this for character card. And I'm going to bring it in to my application. All right. I'm going to have a separate division. That division is going to utilize the character card. Okay, if I take a look at my application, there's my nice handy dandy character card. Now I know I'm going to handle multiples. So I probably want to map through something. All right, well, I can have my, hey, let's create some fake characters. Let's make that into a list of 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And let's actually map through it. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and say, hey, for fake characters, I'm going to map. I want to map through each independent character. And from there, I would like you to render a character card. And there you go. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. We could give it a little bit of styling. I definitely don't want styling to be a big portion of this lecture. So I apologize if I'm flexing through this or going through the styling pretty quickly here. Uh, let's see, I need some flex wrap, and we need a gap. Let's call this 2v min. There you go. So now we have a little bit of more flexibility as we move through it. The cards will compress and decompress. Awesome. Okay, so I have a pretty good layout over what I want to actually render. I have some fake characters that I can iterate through and render my character card component. But now comes the logical portion, which is, hey, I want to be able to communicate with the Rick and Morty API to grab all characters. So let's start looking at this. Gonna go through docs. Here's my get all characters endpoint. And this is where I get back my next and previous. Before I even start worrying about next and previous, let's just worry about getting the very first page and getting some results being console.logged. All right. So I'm going to start off by making my function here, which is going to be get all characters. This is going to be an asynchronous function. This asynchronous function should grab a response, or we could just even grab data, grab it straight from the response. Let's await for Axios.get. Probably want to import Axios from there. And where we're going to be sending this request is going to be to HTTPS grab characters, right? So we could also just make a URL here. Because we're probably going to want to interact with that a little bit programmatically. All right. So then that's going to give us our data. In my data component, I'm going to have info and results. And what I want to return will be data.results. If I want to apply some good practice, I definitely want to put this inside of a try and catch block. Why not? Let's do that right now. We're going to go ahead and try. This should catch an error. This should console.error, the error, also alert. Something went wrong so that we know that something went wrong. And it should still have a return statement. In this case, what we're looking for is a list, or excuse me, an array. So I'm going to keep that consistent and return an array. All right. Any questions regarding this get all characters function before we see it in action? All right, no questions. So let's talk about this a little bit, right? This function here, what it's going to do is it's making a request or making an async request with Axios to the Rick and Morty API. It should always return an array regardless of success. And if successful, the array should hold a number of objects representing a character. All right, there's my entire function breakdown. Now I know how it works. Now I know that I'm eventually going to want to iterate and render this character card. So what should I use to be able to store the results from this get all characters function? How should that work? Should I store it inside of a regular array? Should I just store it inside of a variable? Is there a specific React structure that I should be using here?
I use state, right? Like a use state.
Nice. Yeah, use state. Why use state?
Um, hang on, I just was thinking the word, but because it's like it's like a way of holding on to the information so that you can access it better.
Very close, right? It is a way to hold on to the information so that we can access it. And I want to emphasize the access it better and kind of destructure that, right? So we are going to be rendering it instead into the user interface. Because we're rendering it into the user interface, that means that it's something that we want the virtual DOM to keep track of, right? And the only way the virtual DOM is activated is by using React hooks like you state, right? That's what runs our comparisons and updates our user interface live, makes it way more dynamic. All right. Awesome. So I know that I'm going to need hey, I want to use const. This is going to be characters. I'm going to set characters. And I'm going to make that equal to a useState function, which should hold an empty array as my initializer. Okay. I have all my pieces. I have where this information is going to live, and I have my function that will return the data that I need to render. But how do I handle the rendering component? How do I make sure that useState receives this data in a good order? How does that happen?
Sorry, can you ask that again? I was just trying to type it as you asked it.
Yeah. So here's my oh, why are you crying? UseState is not defined. That's a good reason to cry. Let me see. Let me bring that in. I apologize, everybody. And now fake characters is not defined. That's fair. I did remove that. There you go. All right. So my question is, we have our ability to get all the characters. We have the ability to store them. But how do I actually grab my characters? Right? When should I call this function? And how should I store the return of this function into characters?
Would you use effect?
Okay, yeah, absolutely. We want to use use effect, right? I want to utilize use effect And let's talk about why, because I think that's more important, right? We want to utilize use effect because upon the component, or excuse me, the page mounting, we want to grab all characters, update the value of characters, and then render the characters to the user. Use effect is going to send, if I leave it with an empty dependency array, it's only going to trigger upon mounting, meaning that I can go ahead and set my characters to the return value of get all characters. All right. Now, this isn't necessarily going to work. If I refresh this, what is it they're crying about? Fake characters is not defined. Did I erase it again? Of course I did. All right. Now, this isn't going to necessarily work. I'm actually going to generate a separate use effect that will just console.log the value that we're looking for, which in this case is characters. And I'm going to keep track of characters. Let's go ahead and inspect this. Or I can come over to my console. Let's refresh this. And you can see that I have a little bit of an issue because what's being returned is a promise. Not necessarily useful, right? So how do I fix that? Whenever we're dealing with promises, how do I fix it?
We would use Axios, right? And sorry, Simon.
Oh, that's fine. Go ahead.
Uh, I believe we imported Axios, so I think we would use Axios and we would have await, right?
Okay.
For
Yeah, very close, right? We're done with the Axios integration because Axios is actually what's generating the promise, right? But async and await is what's handling the resolving. And if we come up here, we can see there's async and await that's happening. And then I return data.results. But when I call it in here, this is causing an issue. That's because this portion of code right here is not asynchronous, right? This is still just synchronous code. So I need to give it a reason to be synchronous, right? We can go ahead and say const. This is set vals. This is going to be an asynchronous function. And what it's going to do is it's going to take care of this and await for get all characters. So after that, all we do is call set vals. Now, when I refresh my page, I see a first empty list, which is the initial state of characters. And then I see an array that has 20 items for each one of my characters. Any questions up to this point? Does anyone want a specific block of code to look at?
Can you explain the set vowels again? I didn't quite catch that. My children were talking to me.
Yeah, so set vals is an arrow function, right? And what it's taking care of is setting the characters to a specific value, being an asynchronous action, right? Without having an async function to handle this, this would only generate a promise. Because we want to wait for that promise to resolve, we have to turn it into an async and await. Once this resolves, it returns an array, and that's what we set to the value of characters. Awesome. Any other questions? Okay. Well, now we have our value of characters. So now we could replace what we're actually iterating through. All right. I don't want to iterate through fake characters. Instead, I want to iterate through each one of my characters. We're going to map through them, and I should see 20 of them populating. As far as a key, I can go ahead and add, hey, here is your key. Your key will be of character.id, and then your assigned character will be passed into as a prompt. All right. And something that I like to do is actually to spread out my components. I don't like them running too far in lines because JavaScript code can get pretty messy. I like to keep things nice and organized, right? So I know this is the end of my component. Here are all of the props that are being passed into set component. When I have props, I might as well use them, right? Here I know that I'm going to grab a character for my card image. If I'm taking a look at this handy dandy documentation, for my card image, there's actually an image that's being provided. So I can go ahead and change this to character.image. For card title, we can just change that to the name. And here we can do character.name. And then finally, for some text, we can turn this into a nice little unordered list where I'm going to have a list item saying status. This is going to tell me if the character is alive or not, which I think it's under status. Nice. And then we could just render species, keep it nice and simple, nothing too crazy. All right. If I come over to my component now, here is all of my characters. I can go to about, I can come back home. My characters page shows me all of my characters for that very first page. All right, and we do that by passing in props into a component. All right, this is matching my mapping so far. I'm able to grab all characters. That creates, oh, hey, that creates my card. We'll worry about the link here shortly. And then I have a previous and a next functionality. All right. Any questions up to this point? Let's hear it, Simon.
So I may have completely missed it, but it seems like Voodoo, how you're able to connect to the API. Where are you connecting directly to it? Because I see that you're able to access the object details, like you say character.name, character.status, that kind of stuff to render that. But where is the connection to the API again?
Yeah, that's a great question. Let's take a look at it, right? So my original connection to the API happens from is all characters. And it will always return an array. That array may be an array of objects, or it may be an empty array. Now, what does this actually connect to my code? Well, that's happening in here. Get all characters. It's happening when the component renders. This means that characters, by the time it's actually being rendered, it's either a list, or excuse me, an array of objects, or it is an empty array. Now what we do is we take characters, which is an array of objects, and we iterate through it. For every iteration, we return the following. But let's see here. Something else that we can do so that we could view it a little bit better. Get back. Get back to your spot. There you go. All right. And let's console.log that type of, or let's cancel the log from characters. Let's console.log the character. Which is the character. And let's console.log the type. All right. Now, when we look at this, and let me actually remove some other use effects here to make sure that doesn't get in the way. Nice. If I go in and inspect it, and I come over to the console, and I refresh it, you can see that what we get here, hey, this is coming from characters. The character that I'm looking at is an object named Rick Sanchez, et cetera, right? And we know that it's an object because I'm looking at the type here that is an object. Now, this object that we're looking at here of character, that's coming from line 48. Notice that in line 48, I am passing it in as a prop to the character card. That means that in the character card, this character that we're seeing at the very top, that is a direct match to this object. So when I say character.name, that's referencing to character.name. When I say character.image, that's referencing to character.image. And so on for status and species. Did that answer your question, Simon? Okay, I see head nods. Awesome. Any other questions? Let's hear it, Dom.
Yeah, just on this, one thing I was thinking is when you're making these API calls and you're getting all of that data, would you ever restrict the amount of data you're getting from the API call? Say, well, I just want these things versus getting everything and then just calling the specific things you're looking for within your program.
Yeah, you absolutely would. So you could use something like a filter function, but you would have to build that on the server side to be able to have that capability, right? If the server and the API allows you to have those kind of functionalities, then yes, right? But you're very much at the mercy of the API as to what kind of things can you request and how can you filter. If the API doesn't have filtering capabilities, then you're kind of SOL. Does that answer your question, Tom?
Yeah, super helpful. Thank you.
Of course. Mohammed?
Yes, when we were learning the first couple of weeks, you told us not to get the component to call the API directly, right? Or you told us to tell Claude not to get the components to call API directly with Axios. But isn't that what we're doing right now?
Okay, let me try to clarify that because I don't think I understand the question. So you said at the beginning we told Claude Code not to utilize components to call Axios. Is that right?
You said component should never call directly, should never call Axios directly.
Gotcha. I see. Yeah. So what I meant by that is actually in reference to like code discipline and I'll give us an example, but I don't want to go too far down. So for example, this const get all characters, right? We know that we're going to be dealing with characters, and I know that I'm going to be dealing with the Rick and Morty API. So for example, something like this, I would have touch API.jsx, and then in this API.jsx, I would import Axios, or excuse me, I did that wrong. I would import Axios from Axios. And then in here, I would make const API be equal to axios.create. And then inside of this create, I would pass in the base URL, where the base URL is of this. Right? And then from there, I would grab this entire function that you're seeing here, bring it over to the API. This gets all of my characters. Rather than using all of this, I would just pass in characters. So I guess not even that. All I need is the endpoint, which I just lost the endpoint. So let me see. Get all characters. Boom, character. So what this would come under would be API dot get, and then it would pass in character. All right, so there's the function. From there, inside of the characters page, that's where I would import it. All right, so let me see here. I need to make sure that I export. So now I could go ahead and say import, get all characters from API, and then that calls the API functionality. So it works exactly the same. Nothing necessarily changed. It's just that the code is now isolated, right? None of the functionality about sending my request is happening within the component. It's all staying inside of this API.jsx. Does that answer your question, Mohammed?
Yes.
Awesome. All right, that was a bit of a rabbit hole. I apologize, everybody. Hopefully, we're able to keep up. But in the case that you weren't, this is a perfect opportunity for questions. Okay, awesome.
I-
Oh,
Quick
Sam.
question. So in doing this, essentially all this is doing is the single responsibility type idea of you're isolating that whole Axios component into its own file, separate from everything else, so that it doesn't clutter up the rest of your code.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Hmm.
All I'm doing is making sure that everything stays inside of one file, and I'm applying the single responsibility principle. It's super important whenever you go into deployment, right? Whenever you're thinking about writing an integration when it comes to APIs, APIs typically don't behave the same when you're in local development and when you're on deployment. So if you're not using something like this block here to isolate your API calls, later on, if you have to change anything to the configuration of the API, you would have to do it in every single file where this API call is created, right? So now by bringing it in here, the only place where you need to change it is in here, one time, right? So that's one rewrite in comparison to possibly hundreds of rewrites across the entire code base. Does that answer your question, Simon? Perfect. All right. Awesome. There you go. So we have our characters page. Everything is rendering, but we don't necessarily have the right functionality, right? When I click previous or when I click next, hey, this isn't reacting the best way, all right? Okay, well, let's fix that. All right, if I come over to my documentation, I can see that I'm being provided, hey, here's a number of pages. Here is a next URL. Here is a previous URL. And it's up to us to kind of figure out how we're going to apply pagination. All right. Now, ideally, in order to be able to handle this, I think the best way would be by having three separate URL markers. Here's what I'm going to go ahead and create. I'm going to go ahead and create current URL. I'm going to set current URL. And I'm going to make that equal to useState, which is going to have an empty string. From there, I need a next. And I'm also going to need a previous. All right. Let's dive into that first one by turning it into next, which I'm going to mark as null. I'm going to bring in that next one, or excuse me, the previous, which I'm also going to mark as null. All right, and then for simplicity's sake, because I don't want to overcomplicate the entire project, I'm going to actually grab this Axios instance, or excuse me, this request. I'm going to bring it back to my characters page. All right. Awesome. Now, when I send my request with Axios, I know that this should be going to the current URL. Okay, well, what should the current URL be? Well, that gives me my very first index, or my very first page. There you go. Here's my current URL. Everything is working. Let's make sure I'm able to send that. All right, if I come over to Vite, oh, what are we crying about? Export const API.jsx. Shouldn't be crying. But let's comment it out. Import and export statement, characters, effect. Let's see here. I may need a hard reset. Nope, definitely still complaining. Okay, that's happening inside of characters page. Inside of characters page, we have import Axios, import, etc. Oh, I have an export statement. That will do it. All right. And there we can see that our entire application is still being rendered. All right. Our app is able to send our request and grab. Great. Well, now it's time to set my previous and next capabilities. Okay, so let's add that. So here's my previous and here's my next. Now for this button, what I'm going to do is I'm going to state, hey, disabled. All right, I want it to be disabled if I'm going to go ahead and take a look at my previous URL, if that is equal to null. So that should be disabled. And I'm going to apply the same exact methodology to next. Except that if instead of looking at previous URL, I'm going to take a look at next URL. As of now, both of them are disabled. Great. Well, let's see what comes back here. In data, if I take a look at my document, inside of data, I am getting back a .info, which gives me next and previous. So now I'm going to go ahead and grab info from data. And here I'm going to go ahead and set next URL to info.next. And I'm going to set previous URL to info.previous. And I believe it's just prev in this case. So now if I take a look at my application, here we can see, hey, I'm getting back my next and previous. Next is now abled. And if I take a look at it, we can see that it's actually not disabled. And same thing with previous. Previous is disabled because currently we're getting back null. Well, how do I activate them? All right, what happens when I click the button? How do I make sure that clicking on next will actually render a new state? Well, there's a couple of things that tie into it. First thing is going to be the onClick method. All right, so onClick, what I would like to do is I would like to set current URL to the value of next URL. For previous, what I would like to do is on click, I would like to change the value of current URL to previous URL. And then finally, I just need to execute my get all characters function again. So I'm going to go ahead and keep an eye or fill in my dependency array with current URL. Now, if I take a look here, when I click on next, hey, here you go. We have our next page. We have our next page. Now it's telling me something went wrong. Don't know why. If I go back to previous, that worked great. Really not sure why something's going wrong. So let's check that to make sure that everything's going well. Okay. Access XML, Rick and Morty API, page 6, characters, has been blocked by course policy. No access control origins or all headers present on the request source. Network error. Okay. So this is just their server. It's misbehaving. It's okay. It's not necessarily something that we have to worry about. If we send too many requests too quickly, it's just going to block the communication. So we could scroll a little bit, take a look at what we have, then click next. Everything populates. We're good to go. Scroll a little bit, see what we have, click on next, and there you go. All right. So all of this is a CORS issue. That's coming from the API, not from us. All right. And now I have my capability to view all characters. Okay, awesome. The next part that we're going to be covering is seeing a details page about a character. But before I open up that rabbit hole for seeing a details page, now we're going to start interacting with a couple of hooks from React Router DOM. Does anyone have any questions about everything that we've done up to this point?
Yes, can you just scroll down so I can see how you created the next and previous? Yep. Yeah, thank you.
Of course. Any other questions?
Actually, I do have one. So the API being grumpy, like, does it eventually like reset itself? Like, is it just because it's been used a lot today by like Code Platoon? So in general, it's just probably like catching up and going, you guys have sent way too many requests in a short time, and it'll cool down after a while.
So likely what it's doing is it has a counter that counts how many requests are being sent per a specific time limit. If too many requests are being sent from the same resource, meaning me, right? Not Code Platoon as an organization, but me from my machine. If too many of requests have been coming from my machine, eventually the server will say, hey, stop that. Right, like it's just essentially going to block any more communications and say, you gotta wait. Like you're making too many requests. Right. I hate using this analogy, but you could think of like an annoying kid, right? The kid that's like tugging at you, trying to get your attention. Eventually you're like, hey, like you gotta wait till I'm done talking. That's essentially what the server's doing.
Gotcha. So like if we see that, don't freak out. Like when we're doing like if we're using this or something else in future projects, like assessments or assignments in class, like it'll eventually be like, oh, okay, you're good, and keep going.
We're going to talk about in depth about all the different types of course issues that you could run into because sometimes there are things that you should be concerned about, but in this case, it's not.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Of course. All right. Awesome. So there you go. We have our ability to go ahead and receive our all of our characters, and now we just want to be able to view all of the characters. Now for this view portion, I'm actually going to see if there's a nice React component that I could just use to render an entire character because I would much rather leverage React than have to do it myself. This looks good to me here. And this is even better. So let's go with the first one. All right. Now what we're going to grab is this card component here. And I'm going to use it inside of my character details page. Okay, let's close everything that we do not need. I'm going to come over to character details. And in here, I'm going to go ahead and plug in the card. Let's go ahead and import card from React Bootstrap. And this should work perfectly well. Let's make sure that that worked. And let's actually go to characters \1. Okay, so that did work to an extent, right? We're able to see all of the characters. Now we actually need to grab a character. All right. So this sends us into some of the more fun stuff. Let's have const selected character. Let's set our selected character. And let's make that equal to a useState function that is going to bring in from use params. So for now, we're just going to go ahead and set it to 1. Now, we do want to utilize use params for this. And use params is actually a React router DOM hook. Okay, well, let's just simply view what this character is. All right, let's go ahead and view inside of an h1 tag. Let's see what selected character looks like. All right, so this is giving me an issue. Okay, so object not valid in React children, where we have character ID. Okay, I believe that's happening from use params. And, I need to destructure it a little bit. So let's do that. All right, let's go ahead and do const character for char ID be equal to use params. Okay, there you go. So now we see that it's 1. If I send in 47, that should come up as 47. It's coming up as 1, which is not good. Oh, that's because I'm using that instead of the right thing. Let's go ahead and do character ID. There we go. We have 47. We can use Rick and Morty, and that will populate as Rick and Morty. Basically, anything that comes after this slash will be named as character ID. That is happening because in my router, if I come back over to my router, I can see everything after the slash of characters that matches this portion here on the left-hand side would be matched as character ID. And that matches this portion on the right-hand side. All right, so Rick and Morty gets placed into a variable named character ID. We can extract that variable from use params and grab our character ID. Any questions regarding use params? All right. Well, now comes the easy part. All right, we can go ahead and utilize Axios to grab the actual character, grab our character, and then from there we can actually see what's going on. So let's go into characters here. I'm going to go ahead and inspect this. I'm specifically looking for what their ID is, which unfortunately falls inside of, I won't be able to see what the ID is. So let's go ahead and just go into the documentation. Oh, perfect. ID of 1 will give me Rick Sanchez. So we'll just go ahead and stick with the ID of 1. All right. And how do I get this to actually render Rick Sanchez? Well, we go through the process here. I'm going to make this null. And in here, I'm going to go ahead and create a function that says grab a character. This is an asynchronous function. This asynchronous function is going to go ahead and grab my response. Or let's just call it data. Wrap it inside of a try and catch block. All right. And this data is going to await axios.get. And let's take a look at documentation for being able to grab one single character. All right, so get a character. Here's my schema. And here I'm going to go ahead and call my character ID. That's going to send my request, and then it's going to return data. Finally, I want to place this inside of a use effect. That use effect will have a set val again, which is going to be an asynchronous function. That is going to help me set the selected character to await grab a character. And this is not going to have actually it is going to have a dependency. The dependency is going to be my character ID because anytime it changes, I want to make sure that this gets updated. All right, there you go. So there we have our entire portion now. Now we can actually go ahead and render. I'm going to turn this into a fragment tag. And inside of this fragment tag, I'm actually going to create a ternary statement. What I'm going to do is I'm going to check, hey, is my selected character not equal to null? If it is not equal to null, I want you to render my card. Otherwise, I don't want you to do anything. Just null. And I forgot there should be a question mark. Okay, great. So currently, if I come over to my site, it should be completely empty. Awesome. Let's go ahead and actually refresh this. I'm going to go ahead and take a look at my console, which I regret moving now. So it's telling me that everything's going well. Set selected character, selected character. Okay, selected character is no longer null. This might be the wrong syntax for this. Interesting. I'm running into a little bit of an issue now. So let's go ahead and start debugging. Let's go ahead and what I want to do here is I'm going to go ahead and open up a use effect. My use effect is going to console.log my selected character. And it's going to do this every time the selected character value changes. So if I refresh it, it's null, and I can see that it's only null, which tells me there is an issue. And the issue was that I wasn't calling my set val function. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at that one more time. All right, it is giving me null. I am calling the set val function. The set val function should be running the following: asynchronous in a way of grab a character. This should return data, but I'm not seeing it actually change. Oh, Axios is not defined. That will do it. Reading is important. There you go. So now I'm starting to get back all of my stuff, right? We have Axios, we have all the React hooks that we need. Here's my selected characters for my use state hooks. You could see I'm doing some conditional rendering here for being able to actually render my component. I don't need this use effect. It is nice because we could see what's coming in, right? So here's what's coming in. We have our Rick Sanchez being available to us. I can start changing a couple of things. For example, this image source, we can change that to select a character dot image. And that should populate Rick Sanchez. Right, so for card text, again, many different things that we can do. In here, I'm just going to go ahead and hold a UL that has maybe, let's go with 5 little bullet points there. And let's take a look at the documentation to see what we have. So here, we can go ahead and start with name. For name, we could do selected character dot name. Next, we can go ahead and dive into something like, let's see, let's go with origin. Let's go into selected character dot origin dot name. Okay, we could go into location, which is selected character dot location dot name. We don't really care about episodes. Let's go with created. Why not? And this should be selected character dot created. All right. Now, if I take a look at my application, you can see that my card gets rendered, and there's all of my content regarding Rick Sanchez. Well, now let's bring some functionality, right? Because I want to be able to look at characters, click on this, and then go straight into the actual character that I want to view. Well, if it's going to be in my character's card page. So in my character card, here is my button of go somewhere. I'm going to change that for see details. Jesus. That's not it. Yes, it is. Character card, see details. And then finally, I'm going to go ahead and have an on-click function. Probably want to bring in use navigate. So import use navigate from React Router. Here I'm going to have the navigate, which is going to be equal to use navigate. And now on click, I can go ahead and utilize my navigate functionality. And where I want to navigate to will be to characters. So backslash, backslash, and then I could interpolate the string to also include character.id. And now when I click on see details, that takes me to my character with the ID. If I go into other characters, there we can see 2. We can go back to our characters. Let's take a look at some Albert Einstein ones. And there you go. I can actually view all of my character's information utilizing my React router hooks. All right. Covered a lot of information there. I apologize, everyone. Hopefully I didn't step on the gas too much. Again, here's the character details page. It grabs a character. It utilizes use effect to be able to track on the last parameter that's being passed on the ID. Use params is controlled by the router in create browser writer. This has to be a one-for-one match between the argument and use params. And let's talk about why. All right, let's go ahead and do const params be equal to use params. And here I'm going to go ahead and console.log params. And let me just quickly make sure that there's nothing else there. Boom. All right. If I inspect my object, or excuse me, if I inspect my console, when I take a look at this console.log here, notice that's just an object. What we're doing here on line 10, we're grabbing the object key of character ID and setting it to the value of 12. Right? So we're just doing a little bit of object destructuring. But know that use params generates an object. Yeah, we don't need that, and we don't need that. All right, fantastic. Any questions over everything we've done up to this point? Does anyone want to see a block of code up on the screen before we go up to the break? What block of code? Okay, awesome. In that case, I'm going to leave it up on this page here. We'll go ahead and dive straight into a break. Currently, it is 15:06. Let's reconvene at 15:15 and continue on with our review, everyone. Thank you so much, and I'll see you back in 9 minutes. And now we almost have a completely done working Rick and Morty project, right? The only thing left now is going to be being able to add our favorites. All right, so let's take a look at that portion of the assignment. Where are we at? Readme.md, boom, and boom. Okay, so we're able to do our character details. We're able to activate everything utilizing use navigate. And here we have our favorites, which displays the user favorite characters. Okay, routes, re-rendering it as a child of app.jsx. Users can add or remove favorites capped at 4 favorites maximum. And then styling via React Bootstrap and Tailwind CSS. Sorry, we're not doing Tailwind CSS. And we're definitely not doing a Cypress test suite because we haven't learned that yet. So can't necessarily do it just yet, right? So here's the 4 portions. Let's talk about that from our tree. Here's the drawing of my application. And what I need now is I'm going to need to have the ability to render a new page. And this new page, it's going to be favorite characters page.jsx. Now, this favorite characters page is essentially just going to render our Bootstrap card, and it's not going to send out any request, right? When I visit it, it should just render my Bootstrap card along with the link for every favorite. Maybe there's a couple here, but we know for a fact that there should not be more than 4. Well, now there's a couple of questions that we need to interact with here, right? One is, well, where is it that we should manage the state of favorite characters? Where should that live and why? Should favorite characters just live inside of the favorite characters page? Let's hear it, Kaylee.
I think if we don't want it to reset every time we go to navigate to another page and then back to the favorites page, the use state should be set in the application.
Okay, nice. So we definitely want the app to be the holder of this, which is great. All right. And this is going to be our favorites. I'm just going to put faves there for um, better explanation. And we are going to want a couple of functions that go with our favorites. Let's talk about set functions. All right. So the functionality for all of our favorites. How should this break down? Well, in our favorites, we are likely going to want to be able to add to favorites. We're going to be able to want to remove from favorites. But an additional case here is how do I know when I should add or when should I remove, right? I probably want to know if it even contains it. So is a favorite. Adding a favorite should return a list of objects. Return or removing a favorite should remove, but still return a list of objects. There is a limit. So let's go ahead and do limit 0. And this one is limit 4. And then finally is favorite, right? So is favorite, this one should just return a Boolean, whether it's true or false. And that is all of the functionality that I want to generate for my favorites. All right. Any questions about this? Where should all of these functions live?
Going to be app.
Okay, well, I can hear it in the app, right? I think that's good. So this one comes a little bit where you can say that it's up for dispute, right? You could say, hey, I want to put it in the app so that it's in the same place where I'm making all of my favorites, right? Or you can make the option or the argument that it should live within card. And it should only live within card because card is what's going to manage all of this functionality. Right? None of this functionality is happening in an app, so putting in an app may cluster it, but by putting it in card, I know that's essential to the card. So all of its functions that are essential to its functionality should live within that component. Right? So it's a little bit of dispute. Maybe we could put it in here, maybe we could put it there. There's no other place where I'm going to be using this functionality, so there's no share state. I would argue that the best place to put it is in the card. All right, Jason.
Uh, couldn't you just put it like a button that takes you straight to the favorites page and it displays it? Um, Kind of like that. Like it shares in a way, but everything mainly falls back on a favorite character page in a sense.
I'm confused. I'm sorry. Could you
So
maybe repeat
yeah,
your question a little bit more? What's your question
um,
revolving around?
like couldn't that be placed in both of them and have it in a way like maybe a button that takes you click it on the app page and it takes you straight to the favorite character page and then it displays the favorite characters. You get what I'm saying?
I think I do. Yeah, I think I.
Yeah.
All right. Awesome. So I think I would have to see it in implementation to give you an answer of yes or no. But
Hmm.
ideally, we definitely want it in one place and only the place where it's going to be used.
Okay, thank you.
Of course. All right. So let's dive into this. All right. Here we have our functionality for being able to have favorites. We're going to go into app.jsx. And in app.jsx, I'm going to go ahead and change it to favorites. I'm going to go ahead and set favorites. And I am going to bring back this use effect, or I'm going to change it for some favorites. Nice. All right. Now, here, I want to utilize my card component to be able to add favorites or remove favorites. Probably need a place to render it first. So let's go ahead and make that page. I'm going to change directory into pages. And here I'm going to touch favorites page.jsx. Let's open that up. So here's my favorite page, const favorites page be equal to, that's going to return this, and it's going to return, hey, here's an H1, your favorites. All right, and then we could export default the favorites page. Finally, in our router, we want to make sure that we add this. So I'm going to go ahead and add path of favorites. And I'm going to go ahead and add an element where my element here will be a favorite page. All right. Perfect. Now we just need a comma and we should be good to go. In my components for my navbar, I am also going to add, hey, we want to be able to view your favorites. Nice. I can come to my application. Here you can see I'm in the home page. And if I come over to favorites, my page renders. But currently, my favorites page has no attachment to the state of favorites. Right? I can start this with, hey, 1, 2, 3, 4. And if I go here, I would like to be able to render 1, 2, 3, and 4. Right? I should be able to do something along the lines of, hey, I want to iterate through favorites. I want to map through it, grab each independent character. And for each independent character, I just want to return, or I want to render a list item that holds the IDX. All right, I just want to see the specific index that we're on right now. But as of right now, this function should throw an error. And it should be telling me, hey, favorites is not defined. That's true. Favorites is not defined, and it's not defined anywhere inside this application. Well, how do I actually get favorites? How do we get favorites to render inside of this application? Right? I know it's an app.jsx. Here it is. And I'm trying to render it inside of favorites page. All right, if I take a look here we have favorites and we have our connection. Essentially, what we want it to do is we want it to make its way from the app to my page so that I could render it inside of my application. How do I do that? Let's hear it, Patty.
I think it's use Pause. Hang on. Use out. Holy crud, my brain's erroring. Use outlet. There you go. Use outlet
Nice.
something.
I want to make sure that I use it through context, right? And in this case, the context should be passed in inside of my outlets. I'm going to pass in favorites and set favorites because I want them available. And inside of my favorites page, well, now I can say, hey, const of favorites is equal to use outlet contacts. And now if I look at my application, I should see 0, 1, 2, 3. If I change this IDX for character, I should see the values of 1, 2, 3, and 4. Because that's what I have here inside of app.jsx. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Any questions regarding context and how we're actually passing it down to the favorite characters? Okay, great. Well, now let's actually match it, right? We probably want to make sure that, hey, if favorites dot length is available, so if it's greater than 0, then we want to render all this. But if it's not, we probably want to render something like you don't have any favorites. If I come over to app.jsx and I remove this 1, 2, 3, 4, I should see you don't have any favorites. Nice. There you go. So my functionality is there. I could have some, and I could actually render that 1, 2, 3, 4. Awesome. Now let's dive into our card. I'm going to go ahead and dive into the character card. And in here, I need to have the ability to access both favorites and set favorites. So I'm going to go ahead and grab those. I need favorites and set favorites. And I'm going to grab these from use, outlet, context. All right. Now that I have them, I could create those functions that we were talking about. I need a couple of functions. The first one is add to favorites. So const add to favorites. What this is going to do is it's going to take in a object of character. So I'm going to go ahead and do this as character object. And it's going to go ahead and add the entire character object. So I'm going to set favorites to favorites and the new character object. In order to remove from favorites, I'm going to actually take in a ID because that's all I'm really going to need. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to set favorites to favorites.filter. And what I want to filter for is where every character that does not, or the ID does not match the character ID that's being passed into the function. All right, so there's my ability to add, there's my ability to remove. Now I can add some buttons that will do this. Let's do a button that will go ahead and have a variant. Of success. This button will have an onClick function that will add to favorites, and it's going to add the entire character. Let's do add to favorites. Let's take a look at our characters here. I'm going to go ahead and go into characters. Boom, there's my add to favorites. Let's inspect so that we could see our console. Clean this out a little bit. And if I click on add to favorites, boom, there we get a new favorite of Rick Sanchez. There we get one for summer. Nice. And we could add Jerry Smith. All right. Awesome. Now we could write a little bit of conditionals here. We can say, hey, if favorites dot length is equal to 4. And let's actually say favorites dot length is less than 4. Then we can actually run the operation of set favorites. Otherwise, we could alert you can only have 4 favorites. All right, so now let's try that out. We can add Adolf Hitler. Okay, so that's telling me, or Adolf Linkler. Hopefully that doesn't throw YouTube and just completely block this video. But now we can go ahead and see that, hey, only 4 of them were able to be added. Great. Well, now let's go into removing our favorites. Same thing, I'm going to go ahead and create a button. It's going to look very similar, so I'm actually going to do the handy dandy copy and paste. Instead of add, I'm going to remove from favorites. And instead of success, I'm going to utilize danger. There you go. And I don't want to add to favorites. I want to remove from favorites. And all I need is the character ID. Okay, so now we can see that all of them are there. Rick Sanchez is one of them. So I'm going to go ahead and remove from favorites. Now there's only 3. Everyone except Rick Sanchez. Remove from favorites. Now there's only 2, which is Jerry and Adolf Linkler. We could remove Jerry. And then we could remove Linkler. All right, and then we're back to an empty list. Awesome. So my ability to add and remove works like a charm. But now the next thing that I need to determine is, should I be able to add it? Right? So essentially, what I need to do is I need to have a ternary statement that will ask, hey, is this a favorite? I'm going to set this to not. If it is not a favorite, then it should be able to add. If it is a favorite, I want to be able to subtract. You can see here that if I do const is favorite, and I just simply return true every single time, all of them are going to show to remove a favorite. If I change that to false every single time, all of them are going to show to add a favorite. All right, perfect. Now this favorite portion, I don't think I want it to be a function itself. I think I want it to be a state. So I'm going to go ahead and say const is favorite, comma, set is favorite. I'm going to set that to a use state being a false. I could comment that out. And rather than calling a function, I could just go ahead and check this out. All right. Now, how do we actually interact with this is favorite? Well, let's create that. Let's say const evaluate favorite. What this should do is it's simply going to return if favorites dot includes, and then we're going to check if that includes my own ID, but that's actually not going to work because we're dealing with objects. So rather than doing this, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and return the length of favorites after being filtered. Okay, so we'll pass in our character ID, or even better, we'll just go ahead and filter. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to check every single character, and I want to only return characters that hold the same character.id as the one that's currently being rendered. And then I want to return the length casted into a Boolean. So that should show me true or false. Now all I need to do is I need to set a use effect that will take in a function. What this function is going to do is it's going to set is favorite to the return value of evaluate favorite. And it's going to happen every single time favorites changes. Okay, if I inspect it now, currently you could see that all of these are being set to add to favorites. If I come over to my console, if I click on add Rick Sanchez shows, and this isn't necessarily working the way I expected it to, because now that Rick Sanchez is showing, I definitely expected this set is favorite to change. So that didn't work very well. Let's go ahead and add a console.log for that. Also, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to send it my way. Okay, so it's set to false both times. Interesting. Even though I am adding something into it. All right, and I can see here that calling the function isn't actually doing anything. Or adding a favorite isn't actually doing anything. So adding a favorite should trigger a state change, which should set its favorite to the evaluation of favorite. Let's make sure that this is actually being triggered. Okay, so all of them were triggered and they all hit false. Great. Okay, so now I saw a new trigger happening within that use effect. We could see that that actually returned. But its favorite never changed. Interesting. Its favorite, set its favorite, use state, eval favorite. I am calling the function. Let's make sure this function is being called. Okay, I'm still seeing all of those. Great. But when I click on add to favorites, okay, so there's still another trigger. All right. So why isn't this working? That is a good question. Let's see this. Uh, let remaining be equal to, and let's actually console.log remaining, which should all be an empty list. Great. So now if I add to favorites once, it seems like it added it twice. Let's do that one more time. Oh, okay. Let's try that out. Boom, we refresh, add to favorites. Okay, so one of them is showing up. That was the change to favorites. But here's from line 27. We could see that remaining is actually empty. Okay, let's turn that into a length here. I should be seeing 0. Okay, so I guess I should just return if remaining dot length is equal to 0. Okay, so let's switch that to not equal to 0. But that's still not changing my evaluation. Interesting. So I think what's happening here, the issue is favorites. Well, luckily we could probably switch that up in here, where in add to favorites, we can also set is favorite to true. Okay, great. And if we remove them, we can set is favorite to false. There you go. Nice and easy. All right, we can continue adding. Now we have 3. Now we have 4. If I try to do one more, hey, you can't do that anymore. Great. And there you go. We can move back and forth. So there's all the functionality for being able to add and subtract some favorites. Now, if I come over to my favorites page, I get a error, which is not what I expected. But let's take a look here. Okay, so my favorites page, that's why I get an error. All right, so character currently right now is an object. What this should be rendering is my favorites, or excuse me, my character card. And it should render this where character is equal to character. And we can see this with a key of character.id. Fantastic. All right, well, that reset my state. So now I need to go add a few. Let's go over into favorites, or excuse me, into characters. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Come over to favorites. 1, 2, 3, and 4. That's not good. All right, so we can see here that add to favorites is still being set to false. So let's go over here. And rather than it being set to false, what I want it to be set to would be my eval favorite. All right, so that reset my stuff one more time. Let's go ahead and come over to favorites. Eval favorite before initialization. Eval favorite, what's happening here? Eval favorite favorites. Boom, boom. Let's see. We could do that. And let's do a use effect that will set is favorite to eval favorite. Upon the component rendering. All right, running into a little bit of issues here, everyone. Please bear with me. Let's run these. Let's come over to favorites, and it's still showing up like that. All right, what is your issue? All right, let's try to figure this out. Okay, so the component is rendering. It's additionally set to false. Great. Which is what I expected. My filtering takes all of the current favorites. If the remaining is less than 0, then it should re-render them. It could be because of the key. Okay, so now you're telling me I have 4. So it was because of the key. All right. It was not because of the key. You liar. All right. I'm gonna have to debug this a little bit. Let me try to figure this out, everyone. Favorites, everything's getting passed down. They have different keys. Let's see. My use effect, the setting is favorite. Here's my constant as favorite, which is going into that. Great. My eval favorite is returning true or false after I'm filtering through every single character that does have matching ID. If it is matching, it returns true. If it's not matching, it returns false. And it's happening every single time that the component renders. Okay. If it's not favorite, which we know is favorite, is a state. Why is this a different color? Oh, that's because it's a use state and it's a function. I'm gonna lose my mind for a second. So if you could all give me about 10 minutes to just lose it real quick and try to figure this out, and then I'll call you all back in. If you want to stick around and watch me losing my mind, you're more than welcome to. I'm gonna go ahead and pause. All right, everyone. Well, welcome back. I went down an entire rabbit hole trying to debug my code. Turns out my mistake was one very small factor. I didn't actually access the ID in here. I was comparing the entire character object to the character.id. So it's coming up as falsy because I was trying to compare an entire character object to a singular ID. I just needed to add this .id portion. Um, but now that the embarrassing part's out of the way, we can actually come over and take a look at characters. You can see that those remained. All right, we can add a couple. Hey, this is not gonna work. You can't add anymore. I can come over to favorites. Hey, I decide, you know what? I don't really like him, and I don't really like her, right? So now we can come back over to characters, add a couple more Ricks, and now if I come back over to favorites, only my Ricks are showing. And that's my entire application. All completely front end facing. There's my about page. Here is my home page. Here are my favorites that I have the capability to remove and add. I'm going to go ahead and pretend like this didn't totally just flip out on me and go over to characters. All right, we change them back and forth. All right. Any questions regarding adding and removing character or favorite characters? Okay, just to summarize, inside of app.jsx, we created our favorite characters, where we also have a use effect to console.log that effect, but I don't really need that anymore. In my favorites page, I'm able to grab all of my selected favorites and render them. Inside of my character card, I am grabbing those favorites. I am then able to add favorites. I'm able to remove favorites. And I'm able to evaluate if something is a favorite or not. Additionally, I'm evaluating if something is a favorite every single time a card component renders. All right. From there, I have my ability to be able to see some details about a character. I can also view my favorites if I have any. I can add a couple, still see some details, come back over to favorites, and there we can see that Rick and Morty is still being applied. My network tab is never re-rendering my entire application. It's simply handling everything through request. At this point, does anyone have any questions over this app that we've created using React, React Router DOM, React Bootstrap, and Axios? All right, everyone. It doesn't seem like we have any questions. I hope that that's a good sign and it's not a bad one. I'll go ahead and share all of my drawings, and then this video will get uploaded to YouTube as well. Let me go ahead and stop our recording.